So in our class, we've emphasized the idea that you should always have reasons to believe something. Right? We've looked at arguments and analyzed arguments in order to make sure that you are clear as to why you would make a decision, so that you're clear as to the reasons why you're going to hold on to a belief. It's always good to look for evidence, to look for proof, to come to a belief based upon reason as opposed to just it feels right. Is that necessarily true, though? Are we ever justified in holding on to a belief just based on faith alone? That's what we'll be talking about in this video. So let's imagine you are a pilot and a father brings a bunch of kids to your office and goes, "Hey, I'm going to be having this birthday party today, and we'd really like it if you could fly us, my son and all of his other 5-year-old friends, up into the clouds to take a look at Silicon Valley, look at the Bay, look at the awesome mountains, take a look at the really cool Apple campus. Would you mind doing this for us?" And you go, "Sure, I'll take you up my plane. That's what I do. I'm a pilot." And then the dad asks you, "Hey, is it safe?" And you say, "Sure, of course, yes, it is safe." But you give that answer not without checking your plane. You have not checked your plane. In fact, let's say you've never even flown this plane. It's a new plane. You know anything about this plane. It was just like given to you. So your answer, "Yes, it's safe," was purely based on faith alone. So all the kids, they get into your plane, you take them up, and then they're having this awesome time. They're cheering as they look through and see Levi Stadium where the Niners play, and they see Chase Center where the Warriors play, and then they see Google's weird, awesome-looking complex, and Facebook's awesome-looking complex, and De Anza College, which is the best thing ever. And then they're having this great time and laughing, and then crash, and they all die. I shouldn't laugh at death, but everyone dies through a horrible crash. There's an investigation. It turns out there was like a leak, some oil leak, and there was some damage to propeller, things that would have easily been found if you had checked before you had flown. Now, the question is, are you morally responsible for the deaths of all of those people? You could have said, "You know what, I'm not too sure yet if it's safe," right? You could have said that. Instead, you chose to believe it was safe to fly just on faith alone. Aren't you responsible for all of those deaths? Because you could have avoided it by looking for evidence first. Aren't you responsible for all those deaths because you could have gathered more empirical data about the quality of your plane prior to flying it? For most people in class, they would say, obviously, I'd be responsible, right? For most people in class, when asked, "Hey, so who's responsible?" they said, "Yes, I would have been responsible." This is the argument brought up by William Clifford, British mathematician and philosopher. They didn't have planes back then, but they had ships, same sort of deal. So the shipbuilders are the pilots, and yes, most people believe the shipbuilder would have been morally responsible for any deaths that occurred because they believed their ship was safe based upon faith alone prior to going on a trip. Yeah? So, one way of phrasing Clifford's argument is to say the following: belief on faith alone can lead to unnecessary grievous errors. We should do everything possible to avoid unnecessary grievous errors. Therefore, we should never believe on faith alone. Okay? Now, this isn't the argument I want you to criticize or to analyze for your homework. I want you to analyze and criticize the response to this argument that was presented by William James. So William James was a Harvard philosopher, psychologist, famous for lots of things having to do with pragmatism and the psychology of interesting experiences. So William James has this belief that what's true is what's useful, right? That we are human beings are practical creatures. So he has this idea then that for practical reasons, sometimes You have to have a belief without evidence. It's not even a choice. No, you have to have a belief without evidence. Sometimes, for practical reasons, this is the case. He also believes that some beliefs based on faith alone are useful to have, which justifies us having them. Okay? Now, how does he reason his way to these conclusions? Imagine that your doctor, after evaluating you, finds out that you have a problem, that your brain is to a state where you will for sure die within the next few weeks, and there's really nothing that he knows of that he could do to prevent that from happening. What he does know, however, is that there is this new experimental procedure that may help, right? That could possibly help, but there's no way to really know this, right? There's no data to back up whether or not this will work on your specific case for sure, what the percentage or the chances of it working on your specific case for sure. But this is the only option. Now, they can go through the procedure and save you possibly, or you could die even sooner as a result of the procedure. So what do you do? In this case, says James, you'd be justified in having faith in the procedure. No evidence, no reason to back up the belief that the procedure will work. But if you wanted to have faith that you should do the procedure, even though there's no evidence to support the decision that you should do it, who would blame you? Who would blame you for believing that the procedure is going to work? Right? You're forced to have a belief here, aren't you? Because you can believe that it will work, that's useful to do, that you should do it, or you just don't do it. And then what you're saying is that you believe that it's not worth it to do. Who's going to criticize you for believing it's worth it to try, even though there's no evidence, no data to support you? Similarly, let's say you meet somebody, right, that you really like, and you start talking about marriage. And then it gets to the point where you go, should I marry this person? When will you know? Can you gather enough evidence and data where it's, for sure that you should marry them? When would you know? Can you do a to-do list or a plus-minus list of pros and cons and then objectively do it in a way where you can see, yeah, I should marry them? I mean, when would you know? Just like with the medical procedure, you won't really know until you do the procedure. With marriage, you won't really know whether or not you should marry them until after you marry them, right? In this case, even, having faith that you should marry this person will help the marriage. Can you imagine going into a marriage going, yeah, I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I'll marry you anyway? By doing that, you lessen the chance of success for your marriage. So doesn't having faith in the marriage that it will work out, doesn't that contribute to the truth? Doesn't that help lead you to or influence what the truth is in this situation? Wouldn't you be justified in having faith in the belief that you should marry this person? One more example. You remember the story, The Little Engine That Could? If you're not familiar with it, here's a brief summary. This engine, not too big, not too powerful, and there's this hill, right? The tracks are going uphill, and it's a small train, so it's struggling to go up this track, right? All evidence shows that this is not going to work, right? Most people observing this go, that's almost impossible. You shouldn't even try to go up that hill, right? But what does the little engine do? It starts to tell itself, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. It starts to believe, have faith in its ability to go up the hill. And it's that faith in its ability to go up the hill that allows it to go up the hill. Can you relate that to things in your own life where you needed faith in yourself to get to something, to overcome an obstacle? You needed faith in yourself to get you to the truth. If you asked, hey, can this little engine go up the huge mountain, what's the truth of that? Well, you don't really know the truth of it until the engine tries. When you are dealing with things in your life and you ask yourself, well, objectively, can I accomplish this? Can I graduate? Can I get a good job? Can I make my relationship with my parents successful? You don't know the truth until you try, until you begin. And having faith that you can accomplish it actually influences the truth of it, right? Having faith in these cases is useful. So the argument then follows something like this. First premise from James. I say long here, right, because the author of the article I had to read was long, but it's really William James's argument. Believing on faith alone is sometimes the only way to find truth. Seeking truth, though we may be led to errors in the process, is a justified act. Therefore, sometimes believing on faith alone is justified. What do you think? What do you think about this argument? Well, to understand it, you better ask yourself the same questions I've been asking you to ask every time you hear an argument. What's the main issue presented here? Right? Make sure you're clear about it. In this case, the question really is belief based on faith alone ever justified? Okay, make sure that you're addressing this issue when you critique it in your papers. Well, what's Long's conclusion? Hopefully that's also obvious. He follows James in believing that yes, belief on faith alone can be justified, is sometimes justified, right? Especially since it gets you to the truth. It leads you to the truth. It helps even sometimes create the truth, right? Because of how useful it is. Now, how would you critique this? Well, let's take a look at the type of argument it is. As I wrote it, can you see that it's written as a deductive argument? You can use your Venn diagrams or your rules method to analyze it to see if it's a valid deductive argument. And maybe you can criticize it as being invalid based upon the rules of Venn diagram method. Okay, even if it's not a valid deductive argument, it can come across as an inductive argument. So how would you criticize that? What type of inductive argument is it? The most basic way of criticizing the argument is to ask yourself about these terms, right? Look at the terms that are being used. Is there any issue with clarity? Is there anything that might be ambiguous here? Okay, that's a hint I can give you if you want to criticize the argument. All right? Now, if you have it inferred from what we've been talking about, a lot of people use this argument in one particular way. They often use it as justifying their belief in God. Can a person believe in God? Are they justified in believing in God on faith alone? If there's no evidence that we can agree upon for God's existence, can somebody say, no, I believe in God purely based on faith? And can they be seen as justified in doing that? James's argument, based upon James's argument, James says, yeah. James says yes. But what do you believe? Can you have belief on faith alone? Looking at the concept of God and whether God exists and whether we should believe in God based on faith alone, there's much more to be said about this that we won't talk about right now and that we'll save possibly for a future video.